In today's video, we're going to walk you through everything you need to know about hiring your first employee, from deciding what they're going to do to the paperwork that's involved. Be sure to like and subscribe. Let's dive right in. So I think probably every time we've had to hire like the first employee in a business, it's always super stressful because you like can't really afford to pay them, right? Like when I first hired you for Call Porter, my offer was like, what's the least amount I can pay you? Which comically is how I've hired.
Great offer, by the way.
Yeah, hey, you're here. But you also get to a certain point where like one person physically can't work more than they're working. Mm-hmm. And if you want to grow or scale, you've got to bring on additional help. I mean, that was Dad's problem with running his own businesses was, you know, he would get to that point where he had to work 16-hour days, but not where he could have two people working 8-hour days.
Yeah, I think it's most people's problem too, is knowing how and when to get to that point.
So the reason I'm having you do this video with me and I'm not just doing it myself, for anybody who doesn't know, there's been times that I've called Justin and been like, hey, can you fire this person for me? Or like, hey, can you do a phone interview with this person for me and make sure that they're like going to be a good fit? Because hiring just really isn't my strength, but you've hired and fired, how many?
Hundreds of people at this point. Not fired hundreds, but definitely hired hundreds of people.
That's good.
Yeah.
You want to bring more in than you push out.
Yeah, it's a smaller percentage of firings for sure. Yeah.
So let's just kind of walk people through the basics of like somebody's at the point of they know they need to hire, whether they want to or whether they feel like they can afford it or not. They physically can't work more. What's the process for somebody that's never done this before?
Sure. So like for me, you have to make it as practical as possible. So writing everything down of what needs to be done. So job duties, what their qualifications need to be, what the compensation is going to be, things like that. Like doesn't have to be anything fancy at this point. I just put it down on a piece of paper.
Like a job description.
Yeah, job description type stuff, you know, what their expectations are going to be each day, hours they're going to work, what you're going to pay them. Benefits,
which
if you offer them.
Small business, you probably not.
You might not be there yet, but if you can offer them, even like, you know, like what we did is vacation time, you know, after the first year, something easy to start with. But
yeah, we'll do like a health insurance stipend where we don't offer health insurance, but if they show they have health insurance, we'll do like $200. I think it's $200 a month that we'll do, or 200 every other check or something like that.
Yeah.
So something like that.
Yeah. So get it all on paper. Just get everything out of your head of what you want this person to do. And then from there, you can really start to organize it the way that you need it to be for it to translate very well for someone that's looking for a position.
I think that's important for your employee because I've personally worked places where like you get there and then what your actual job is isn't what you were told it was. And it ends up being kind of this like, okay, this really isn't what I was hired for, which doesn't always go very well if it's not what the person was expecting to do.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's the clearer and simpler you can make it, the better it's going to be for you and for the person you're hiring.
So we've got, you know, we know we need to hire. We've got mapped out what we want them to do. How do we start to get this like out into the ether where
got to get it out there, right?
Yeah. How do we start to get applicants coming back in?
Sure. So there's a bunch of different things you can do, all kinds of different softwares. You can manually post it in places. What we personally use in all of our businesses is WiseHire, which we'll put a link below to help people out with that and save them some money up front. But
I think you guys get like $100 and we get $100 or something like that.
So saves you a good amount of money. What's really cool about services like that is they'll mass post it to all the job posting sites that are out there. With the exception of Craigslist. I found that out the hard way. It does not go to Craigslist.
Bro, do you even want Craigslist employees?
I have actually hired some good people off of there.
Okay. All right. I'll reserve my judgment.
I will preface it's some. Not a lot. Just some.
I was going to say, I've hired some terrible people that came off Craigslist.
Yes, there are still quality people that look there.
We've got another video coming out on how to fire people. That was from my Craigslist hire, but go ahead.
That's all right. I didn't know that was a Craigslist hire, actually.
Oh, yeah.
So, okay. Anyway, that's a whole nother discussion. But what's really cool with Wise Hire is it breaks it down really easy for you of each section. So that first section that we talked about with writing down what this person needs to do, it holds your hand through the process. So it tells you what's their job qualifications and gives you a description of what you need to say or how it needs to be said. Fill everything out once you post everything on there. Before it's posted, it's actually reviewed by their team to make sure it is. You didn't know that, did you?
No, it's because I'm learning things about a software I pay for. This is great.
Yeah, so they actually have a team of people that audit the post to make sure that it's going to perform well and rank well on all these different sites. And they'll actually give you feedback on it and say, hey, you need to change this or fix this. And then it goes out. So it makes it really easy. And there's a few things you can pay additional amounts to boost it if you want, but I never do. Their regular service is valuable enough.
I think I've used ZipRecruiter in the past, and it was okay, but it was like super expensive. I think it was like $300 a month, which is a small business. It's like, this doesn't make sense.
Well, and I think most of those, I've never used ZipRecruiter, but I think you have to keep paying for it or like start a whole new account if you cancel it or something like that.
Interesting.
I could be wrong.
I don't think ZipRecruiter works that way.
Okay. Well, maybe don't use that because I have no idea. But with Wise Hire, you can stop and start at any time. It's great. Like as soon as you take your posts down, you stop getting charged. You put them back up, you get charged again. So it makes it super easy and very user friendly.
So I think we'll do a whole nother video on the actual interview process because that's pretty important, and I think there's a lot that goes into that. But for the sake of this video, we wanted to more walk through like the mechanics of hiring somebody and what that actually looks like. So we've talked about job description. We've talked about getting the job posted and out there. Let's assume you've got applicants back in and you've got somebody that you think you want to hire. What's the paperwork look like?
So the paperwork, you'll have to get it from your state. Most of the government state sites have this, but you're going to need your W-4s for your state, W-4s for federal. If you offer direct deposit, some sort of form for direct deposit, or
W-4s are like income tax withholding, how many dependents.
Yep, all that fun stuff.
The number kind of the thing. Okay.
That you can't technically help people with, even though everyone's going to ask you the questions about it. But
that's good to know as a business owner.
Yeah,
you can just kind of like.
Yeah, like people are going to ask you questions of how should they file? Here? What should I claim? You really can't tell them.
Got it.
I preface and just say like, this is what I do. But again, you have to make your own decision for yourself. So
makes sense.
Yeah. But yeah, W-4s for state and federal. You can get them online for pretty much any state very easily. I-9s, so making sure you're hiring people that are legal to work in your state. Direct deposit, if you offer it. If you don't offer it directly, a lot of like payroll tracking or software type things will do direct deposit for you.
I use a tool called Gusto.
Okay.
That's pretty easy. It's pretty cheap. I think it costs me like $30 a month.
Okay.
But they do all of that paperwork for me. And then they also do my direct deposit, like they auto pull it out of my account. And then they also do my tax filings for state and federal for that business for the employees, which is nice.
Yeah, we do something similar. We just have a local company that does it. So they're not
support small business.
Yeah. Especially this year. It's a little helpful.
Yeah.
And then if you want to do a background check, drug test, that kind of stuff, we don't worry about some of that stuff as much in certain roles, but it's ultimately at that point what your preference is going to be for your business.
You'll probably notice we didn't mention 1099s. We're going to do a whole other video on the difference between a W-2 and a 1099 employee. A lot of businesses like to flirt with this area that's not really that gray and try to fudge it in their favor. And that's not what you want to do. So we'll talk about that in a different video. Pardon this interruption. A couple people have told us down in the comments that I talk too much with my hands. But if you're enjoying this video, please like as well as subscribe. We're putting a ton of effort into this channel and would love your help in helping it take off. Back to where we were. So another thing that I think makes sense for us to touch on is kind of the employee handbook. Some states are a right to work state, others are not. It's like in some states you can fire somebody just because it's Tuesday and cold out.
Yep.
Now, obviously you wouldn't do that. You're a good person. But in other states you have to have documented reasons for why that person's being let go.
Correct.
That we'll discuss a little bit more in the firing video. But I think one good way to kind of just set the tone up front is an employee handbook. Like those expectations of, if Do you have a drug policy? What is it? Like I know with us, for like 99% of our roles, we don't care if they smoke weed.
Right.
But if they're doing meth in a work truck, which I've had happen, then we're probably going to let them go.
Gonna have an issue, right?
Man, that guy could single-handedly gut a house by himself in like 6 hours.
That's a shame.
I miss you, Keith. But you want to make sure you have those things outlined. Similarly with things like, time off.
Yep.
If an employee hits you up 24 hours before the day they went off and is like, hey, can I just not come to work tomorrow? You want to make sure you have that kind of stuff. And then I also like to have things like a late policy, like if they're showing up late or clocking out early. You think of any other like basics that somebody would want in an employee handbook they're throwing together themselves?
Yeah, and I mean when you say employee handbook, like it doesn't have to be 45 pages.
No,
long.
this is not a dictionary.
I just don't want someone to think that because that's what I thought.
No, it could be a couple pages in a Word doc.
Exactly, like just
that you add to as employees. Yeah. We have rules we've named after people, so we have like. We have the Melissa. We have so it tends to get longer as you're in business. But
you learn more things about what's needed. So yeah, I mean, as basic as you can make it, like when they should be starting, what counts as late, when should they be requesting off? Like all of our employees, if they're requesting off for a date that they know about, they need 2 weeks notice, and then we may or may not approve it. So you also have to keep it specific in there to say like. You may or may not get that approved based on company needs, things like that. But, I include things like how we expect our team members to behave with each other and how we expect them to treat other people that are working with us, whether if it's other employees, our clients, confidentiality. We do that with all of our employees because we work with so many people, so many clients out there. They all have to sign confidentiality agreements and NDAs, things like that.
Okay. So extra paperwork. You're hiring an employee. You may want to have a non-disclosure agreement. Yep. I thought we were missing something.
Yep.
And a confidentiality agreement. A lot of folks will also try to do a non-compete, which, spoiler alert, they're not really enforceable.
They don't hold much weight.
But, it makes them think that they can't compete with you.
It's more of a scare tactic than anything because we both have worked at places that made us sign those. So, but as, lunch breaks, when do lunch breaks happen?
If you have a no drinking on lunch policy.
Yeah. Stuff. Or if you have, you want your lunch break staggered, like our call center, we don't want everybody going to lunch at the same time because then there's no one there to answer the phone.
Yeah.
Right. So outlining it as basic as you can be and then always constantly updating it and making sure that when you update it, you go over that with people too, because I have made that mistake.
Well, I do think with employee handbooks, you want something about conflict resolution in there.
That's a good one.
Because you don't want like a tattletale culture or somebody circumventing their manager when your company gets that big. And you want it to be very clear of like how conflict's handled, how things are resolved, kind of what the chain of command looks like. We had an issue in one of my businesses where folks... using the expression lower on the totem pole feels a little wrong, but people would try to go around their supervisor. There you go. Entry-level employees would try to go around a supervisor to get to somebody else because they didn't like the answer they were given.
Yep.
And we actually put a policy in place where folks get fined. Because we'd have managers talking to people that weren't their employee or weren't their direct reports instead of talking to the person who managed them. So kind of outlining that, I think, makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, no, I would agree.
We've talked about kind of the paperwork that goes on between the business owner and the employee, but what paperwork does the business have to do? I mean, we talk about the employees doing W-4s and W-2s and all that, but what kind of paperwork does the business have to do to make sure they're in compliance with the state?
Sure. So, federal too, especially we'll just go as basic as possible. If this is your first hire, you need an EIN, so Federal Employer Identification Number. Which I've actually never set up. You always set them up, so you can do it online.
It's super easy. You do it online and they email it to you.
Okay, that's what I figured. But with your state also, you have to withhold taxes. So you have to do taxes, Social Security, Medicare, things like that. That's all kind of grouped into one. So you can usually go to the Department of Revenue website for your state and set up a tax withholding account. Separately from that, unfortunately, they're not combined. You also have to do a unemployment withholding one as well, that for each paycheck that comes out, a certain amount's set aside for that. The other thing that's a little weird with some states is some states also have county taxes you have to register for too.
Yep, they have that here in Florida.
Okay, so we learned that with Indiana when we hired our sales guy for Call Porter. We had to have an individual county tax one too for where he lives. So you kind of have to research what your state's laws are. If you're having a really hard time finding it, can't find it online, you could always talk to an employment attorney. Probably cost you a couple $100 to find out that info if needed. But those are really the three big things that you need.
I would really recommend people either use like a local payroll company or something like Gusto, which is what I use, just to kind of help simplify a lot of this so they're not trying to do all of it themselves. It's kind of like, yeah, you could figure out the job boards and manually paste your thing and create all these accounts, or you could pay a couple $100 and have it just go out. I think workman's comp is also something that you have to figure out if you need or not. Like if an employee gets hurt on the job, you want to make sure that they're, taken care of, but also that you as the business owner are protected.
Yeah, absolutely.
And checking with kind of local legal counsel and figuring out if you need that or what levels you need makes a lot of sense as well.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, even getting involved in like Chamber of Commerce locally where you're at, getting involved in the community that your business is in is always really helpful. Get the extra tools that you might not be thinking about because you're working with people that have been where you're going. Right.
It's also a great way to just meet people and network. So I think in closing, I'll share a comical interaction we had with an employee who's no longer with us. And I think you have to, as a business owner, keep in mind that you're dealing with people.
Yep.
Like, I'm pride myself on being pretty prompt, pretty on time. I didn't used to be. I used to always be the guy who was late. Michael, my videographer, was late to this shoot, which is why that was fun. But it was kind of like, okay, I'm going to start to try to always be earlier on time. You're going to have a little bit of grace with people. There's going to be things that come up. It's just important to make sure that it doesn't become a pattern. And like, you're going to have like awkward people stuff if you're not used to working with somebody or kind of having like that close of a relationship with somebody. Just because it's comical. We had an employee that we were troubleshooting her computer with, both Justin and I, on a Zoom call. And
and this is prior to 2020 when all this stuff started happening too.
That's fair. So, if you're doing a screen share with somebody, make sure they know that you can see their screen. She, logged in, gave computer screen sharing access, and didn't realize that all of her nudes were pasted to her desktop. And she was like, oh my gosh, can you guys see my screen? And we were like, no, feels like the better,
it hasn't connected yet.
Yeah, but like, you're going to have some awkward things. There's going to be some kinks to work out. I mean, if you're in a small business, if they're going to be working at your house or out in the field, you're going to have some things to work through. But hopefully this video gives you at least a blueprint on the steps you need to take to go from kind of that solopreneur, it's just you, to starting to transition into that business owner of you've got your first employee, onwards and upwards.